Welcome everyone to another of the Tiny Talks. This is the 12th of a series of 13. They've all been absolutely fabulous. So as you know, these series of talk is put together by the Ensham Nature Recovery Network, which is brings together groups of like-minded people and organizations who have a shared interest in nature, particularly locally, with a local focus. Today's talk is by Renee Watson, and Renee's actually not native. She's imported from Australia, and she's a biochemist by training and a scientist, innately, naturally a scientist, very curious. In fact, so curious, set up the Curiosity Box, and which is one of the small businesses in the village. Many of you know her. And today she's going to talk about fungi. So over to you, Renee.
Thanks, Kerry. So I think it's probably worth pointing out at the beginning that I am not a mycologist. I am a fungi enthusiast. So I'm still learning, very much learning, and there is so much to learn. So today is really just about sharing with you a little bit about some of the experiences that I've had, what I've learned along the way, and kind of just sharing my love of fungi more than anything else, and a little bit of what I'm doing around the village to do with that. So I'm going to share my screen because the hardest thing about today was choosing from all my beautiful fungi photographs. And it's not that my photographs are beautiful, it's just that the fungi is so beautiful that, yeah, I've got a load of slides with nice pictures on. And if you have questions throughout, please do pop them in the chat because we'll come to those at the end and hopefully I won't run over time. Right, so let's see if I can get this technology to work. Right. Can everyone give me a thumbs up if you can see the slides and that's all looking okay? Great. Okay. So every photo that is included in the slide is something that is a photo I've taken, and they've all been taken either in Ensham or in one of the neighbouring villages. And really, I was saying to Katrina earlier, I only really started sort of properly, well, I'm going to be honest, becoming obsessed with fungi about a year ago. So these are all really taken within the last year. I thought it would be helpful to start with a really basic overview of what fungi is. And I'm going to share some links with Lucy to share at the end, which are there's a really brilliant In Our Time episode on fungi and a couple of other links to various videos and websites where if you do want to find out more about the kind of technicalities and the biology of them, then they're good places to start. But basically, when most people think of fungi, they think of the thing that we see, the kind of classic toadstool like the one I showed on the first slide, which is the fruiting body of the fungi or the mushroom. And the vast majority of mushrooms that we see are called Basidiomycetes. There are various other groups as well, but that's the one that if you kind of loosely look out for fungi that you're probably seeing. One of the things that I think is really fascinating about fungi is that they have something called chitin in their cell walls. And for that reason, they are more closely related to animals than they are to plants. But they are so different in so many ways to both animals and plants that they have an entire kingdom of their own. And they are very, very old, and they are in everything, everywhere. So all of us right now are surrounded by fungal spores. Our skin is covered in it, our insides are covered in them, and they are not just the things you see outside, but lots and lots of varied things that you'll find all over the world. And one of the things that I love is the more I've been sharing the photos that I've been taking of the fungi I've found, is that there are people literally in loads of other countries you wouldn't expect, like Malaysia and Australia and America, that are identifying and finding exactly the same kinds of fungi. So it's very, very widespread. And they break down animal matter as well as plant matter. So mushrooms and fungi are actually omnivores. A couple of fascinating facts. Now, I had a really big problem when I first started looking for fungi about sort of taking them and picking the fruiting bodies, because it just felt really wrong. And I was worried that I might be sort of, reducing biodiversity and things like that. But the more I read about it, the more I realized that actually that fruiting body is a bit like picking an apple off a tree. And it's not going to kill the fungi itself, because there is an entire amazing network of two different things. So hyphae, which you can see, this is a scanning electron micrograph of hyphae, which are like finger-like projections that go into the soil, through the soil, searching for food. And when the hyphae join up into this amazing network, then we call that a mycelium. So hyphae and mycelium make up the bit of the fungi where most of the reproduction happens. Now, fungi are floozies. They will mate and reproduce in pretty much any way you can imagine, and that all happens at this level. Now, fungi and trees obviously have a very, very close relationship, and without fungi, we would literally be overrun with an enormous amount of dead and dying matter, or matter that isn't actually being broken down, because it's such a big part of breaking things down. But it's also a really big part of things living. So here you can see this is called mycorrhiza. So myco for fungi and rhiza for root. And the yellow stuff here is the fungi attaching to the root of a tree. And here you can see it actually infiltrating the cells in a branch in some wood. Now, this can work really in the favor of the tree, and there's some amazing examples of fungi that actually help plants to communicate with each other. So, for example, they'll send out and help carry signaling molecules from one plant to another to let those plants know that there might be aphids around, and the plants can then respond to that to protect themselves against insects and predators. And if you do search online for mycelium highways, of which many of if you look around us in the world, many of the kind of big superhighways and structures that we've created have been inspired by the complexity and the dynamic nature of mycelium. But when you look inside, if you can put a luminescent dye in the middle of a mycelium structure, and you can see the signals whizzing through there and all the nutrients moving through. It's just an amazing sight to see, and they play a really critical role, which we're only really just starting to understand. And this is a picture from down at the fish ponds of a fungi called coral spot fungi, and this is one of the ones that it mostly feeds on dead and dying wood, but can feed on live trees. So it can be something that helps us to break down wood, but can also be something that causes trees to die. That's on some dead wood. So I said we don't know very much about fungi, and that's absolutely true. We do know quite a bit, and I certainly only know an absolutely tiny bit of what we do know. And what we do know is really only a tiny bit of what I think we can know. So I wanted to start by sharing some numbers of fungi in the world. So this is me with a lovely thing. This is actually at Whitnham Clumps, a huge clump of fungi. And I think in the last year, I've identified approximately 500 different species of fungi in and around Oxfordshire, which I was pretty pleased with until I looked and realized that in the UK, we have identified about 15,000 species of fungi. And in the world, we've identified about 170,000 different species of fungi. And if you think that's a lot, that is the number of fungi they think there probably are in the world. So if you're the kind of person like me who loves the idea of being a bit of an explorer, of discovering new things, identifying a species and naming it after yourself, then fungi is the place you need to be, because there are so many still to discover. They reckon about 3 to 5 million, but that is a bit of a stab in the dark. So focusing back down and into Encham and the fungi around here, this is a breakdown of some of the fungi I think that I found in and around Encham. So in the Peace Oak across the road, I think I found about 20 different species. I've only been there 3 times, so which is really silly because it's literally across the road from where I live, but I will keep going back there. I only went sort of towards the end of autumn when the biggest peak of the fungi season was coming to an end. The fish ponds, I'll come back to a bit later, but I think I've identified about 35 different species there. Roads and verges around Ensham, about 37. The river, the walk from Ensham to the river and some of the woods around Ensham, 45, and neighbouring spots, including places like Foxholes Nature Reserve and Eastleigh Common, Northleigh Common, one of the Lees Common up that way, about 450. That's including also Millennium Wood and some of the woodlands around here. So there are a lot to spot. And one of the things that I love about fungi is the diversity. They really are like totally modern biology, because in terms of shape, size, color, everything, the way they reproduce, they are so incredibly diverse. And this is just a few examples of fungi that I found locally that show you this. Some of these are a little bit unusual. This one here is, you will see this actually a lot when you see a blue tinge on wood, on rotting wood. But what you don't often see is them fruiting, and certainly not like this. So this is a blue or green elf cup fungi, and it only fruits for a very, very short amount of time. And it usually, they think that it only fruits in autumn, but actually I've seen evidence that it might happen more regularly throughout the year if conditions are right. And one thing that we're definitely seeing is that fungi are on the move. They're responding to climate change very quickly. They are the kind of organism that can live sort of dormant for a really, really long time until the conditions are just right, and then they will fruit. So they're very good at responding to changes in the climate. They can be huge. So this one here was one we found in Foxholes, and Annika there for perspective. This is a beach polypore. And this one over here is actually on the stump just out front of our house, which I've been monitoring for quite a few months. And it's amazing just on one tiny stump how many different fungi I can find. So to give you a bit of perspective, this is the microscopic version of that. And I'm going to come on a bit later to the tools that I've found that I like to use to help me to make the most of the things that I find, including a little microscope. And this is the microscope. So this is another version. This is also on the stump out the front. This is a slime mold. And this is a kind of microscopic image of that close up. I just love how they look like little Smurfs. I think this is definitely where Smurfs would live if they lived somewhere. And you can get, obviously, when you're trying to identify fungi, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do, looking really closely at the gills is one of the very important things that will differentiate between different fungi. And so being able to look close up under the microscope is great fun. And there have been times when I've done this and not realized until later that I've, excuse me, I've managed to capture a little creepy crawly or something hiding in between the gills as well. And now these are all fungi that I found in the fish ponds. This one, actually, I don't know, can people see me as well? Can you see that? Yeah, so this is that fungi that I found the other day. It's called a turkey tail, and it has wonderful pores that, as they dry out, start to look a little bit like mother of pearl or something like that. There's a lot of this around down at the fish ponds. This one down the bottom left is called glistening ink cap. And it gradually goes from being this beautiful tiny mushroom that looks like it's been sprinkled with icing sugar, and it sort of becomes this oozing black mess by the end of it. It's absolutely brilliant. And this was taken in autumn last year down at the fish ponds, and I was so excited. I went down there today and I found the first, this is a tiny new one. The first one of these has popped up. So the season for these is quite long. And this has just popped up down at the fish ponds today. And this was part of quite a big cluster. So they'll be out in force in the next couple of weeks. And this one also was, most of these were taken in autumn, but this one was also taken very recently. There have been so many of these around. They're called velvet shank. And they tend to love moisture, and I just think they look absolutely beautiful. The glossy and velvety look of them is so lovely. One of the things that I really love to do is to spot things in the fungi that I find. I am finding that there are lots of fantastic arty people in Ensham who will also be able to help me with this and have helped me with this. And Heather, I don't know if Heather's on the call, but she's one of the great people for this. But I don't know if you can see in this that it looks rather like a seahorse. And this one here, I think, looks like one of those works of Japanese art where they make the beautiful line drawings with the waves. And this one, I think, looks quite a lot like Mick Jagger's lips. So I quite like finding similarities to fungi and other things in the world. One of the other things that I think is really fascinating about fungi is how much they change. So this is actually the same fungi at different times. So if you're trying to identify fungi and you see this and you see this, I mean, it's really difficult to see that and you wouldn't naturally necessarily think that those are the same fungi. And this is why I think, you know, a lot of people, if you do go out looking for them, I don't eat anything that I find. I'm definitely not confident enough to make that call. And I wouldn't encourage anyone else to do it unless they're with a trained mycologist. I think these are my two favorite finds from around the village. So this one's called an Amethyst deceiver. And this is a very good example of how my photography equipment is not up to par because it's a bit blurry. But I do love how you can sort of see through the gills at the bottom and this brilliant purple color. This is actually one of the fungi that is edible that's quite easy to identify because it's so unlike anything else. I've not been brave enough to try it, partly because eating something that kind of color, that vivid purple, doesn't seem quite right. But also, they look so beautiful in the wild. I kind of like to leave them there. And this one was a really lucky find. This is actually just on the verge, on the footpath along the A40 near the Tesco garage. And this is a snowy wax cap. And wax caps are one of the families of fungi that are becoming more and more endangered. Largely due to habitat changes and grasslands not being kind of left. But this was a real beauty to find. One of my favorite finds so far, though, has got to be this. So this is down at the fish ponds. And this is a kind of warty, slightly hideous looking thing that's called the artist bracket or Ganoderma. And as you can see, there's all these tiny little pock marks and galls in the bottom of them. And when I saw this, I thought, oh, I've never seen anything like that. I'm going to have to go and try and figure out what that is. And I contacted a few people that I know this kind of thing. And it turns out that this is actually really rare. It's been infested by this little chap here, which is a yellow flat-footed fly. And it creates these galls only in this fungi, and it is the only insect that has this kind of parasitic relationship with a fungi. And it nests in here until it's ready, then it burrows out through these holes and drops down into the soil, where it burrows into the soil and has its next stage of its life cycle. So we've got a nice stash of those in Ensham, and it's so unusual and so rare I had to register it with the British Entomology Society, so that was quite exciting. I'm going to have to skip over this because I'm going to run out of time if I don't. This is also, I have so many favorites, but this was another one of my favorite finds. And when I looked at this and found it, this is a fungi called Helvella crispa. And it's named because they come in the most extraordinary contorted shapes. And it's all supposed to be about like being the mouth to hell is where the name comes from. And as I was looking at this afterwards, I was like, it looks so much like something I recognize. And I'm pretty sure this was Heather said to me, it looks like the kiss, like Rodin's The Kiss. And when I put them side by side, I was absolutely gobsmacked by the similarities. I just think that's so beautiful. And the fungi is even better because you get a few little bonus bugs on that. I'll go really quickly through this because this would normally take quite a long time. But one of the reasons I love fungi so much is because it makes me feel great. I tend to be a little bit of the kind of person that tries to always do too much. And what looking for fungi and foraging has done for me is helped me to slow down, to take more kind of deep breaths, to enjoy the world much better, and to take a lot more pleasure in the small things. The only way to successfully look for fungi is to stop and to get down low on the ground and to spend time in one place looking really, really deeply at things. And being a scientist and being a biochemist, one of the first things I wanted to do was kind of find out why that makes you feel so good. And the reality is that when we do things that are kind of on the brink, on the edge of our curiosity, when we don't necessarily know what the answer is, we don't know what we're looking at, when we're trying to find something out, then we get a massive rush of two of nature's pleasure hormones, the dopamine and serotonin, in these two parts of the brain. And the thing is that the older we get, the more we worry. And I think worry and curiosity are kind of, curiosity is the antidote to worry. So getting out, being curious in nature is a fantastic way of helping us to reduce worry and anxiety in our lives. A couple of fungi facts. It is widely said that the biggest organism in the world is a fungi, a honey fungus that's about 3 miles wide. There is some contention about that because, you know, how do you define an organism? 1 teaspoon of soil will contain about 100 meters of hyphae, which I just think is extraordinary, thinking about how you'd fit that much of something into such a small amount. It is a huge communication network. And I think there are so many parallels between fungi and humans and the way we behave, and we can learn a lot from fungi. They do work together incredibly well. They can be UV reactive. You can see the picture here, which is not one I took. This is the only one I've pinched from somebody else. And they can be deadly. And this is the thing that we kind of hear about quite a lot. You know, don't eat fungi. They have amatoxins in them, which basically make your cells leaky and you die horribly. Don't do that. Finally, the things that I have my smartphone camera, so all the photos here are on my smartphone. The one top tip, if you do want to get out and you don't want to take a lot of equipment, is rather than, we always take our photos on our cameras like that, but if you turn them upside down to take a photo of fungi, it changes the light and the whole perspective, and you get so much better photos by just turning it upside down. So fiddling like that. This is my smart device microscope, which just attaches onto there. So I can keep that in my pocket, and that gets me about 60 times magnification, which is not perfect. It's not a brilliant microscope in terms of getting cellular detail, but it gives me much more deeper look. I always have this in my pocket. I have about 12 other books now and every time I think I've got the best book, there's another one I want to get, but this one stays in my pocket because it covers most of the common things. And then finally, pocket knife, because there are lots that you might want to slice or just scuff the surface, because that will help you to ID them. Oh, and Pilates classes. I find myself becoming increasingly like a contortionist, trying to get into the places I need to get to find the fungi. Okay, skip past that. Oh yeah, there's one more thing. So I've decided to do a very brief fungi survey down, and it's kind of a survey-ish because it's not a proper scientific survey, but down at the fish ponds every week. And this is part of my own mental health strategy as well, to make sure that I definitely get out of the office occasionally. Every week for about an hour on a Friday, I head down to the fish ponds, and I'm going to do that for the coming year. I'm on week 4, and I'm going to take photos and log everything that I find. Because I think that will give us a really interesting picture of what's happening down there and what fungi we have. And I set up a website called Fungi Watch, and I've got a couple of social media pages. So if anyone finds anything down at the fish ponds and you want to contribute to my survey, then I would absolutely love to have your contributions. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, fabulous. Fabulous trip through the world of fungi there. So it's open for questions now, and there's some in the chat, but if you're not that confident using the chat, you can wave furiously at the camera and we can see if we can spot you. If you would like to do a talk like that, if you'd like to raise a question. So on the chat then, let's see if we've got some questions. The first question is about, well, I can't see it now. How do I scroll back up? It's about the blue one. Where's the blue? Where and when did you see the blue one? The bright blue thing?
Yeah. So there is some down at the fish ponds at the moment, but it's not fruiting yet. But I will be keeping a very close eye on that. So when you go, when I go into the fish ponds from the road, I say there's the high road and the low road. Obviously, I always take the high road first. And about a little way down the high road, there's a little inlet that you can kind of wander down into. That is full of fungi at the moment. And just on the right-hand side there, there's a log with a big patch of the green elf cups, not in fruit yet. Those ones I found off the path in Sherborne Estate last autumn.
There's another question here from Andy and Les. It's, do you think increasing network of motorways is interfering with fungi superhighway? Well, I suppose sort of any disturbance of the ground.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, any highways are going to interrupt nature, aren't they? You know, they're going to be destructive. I think the interesting thing is when I was kind of feeling guilty about thinking about picking a fruiting body, when I was reading more about that to try and make myself feel better, the thing that came out actually out of some really good, very rigorous scientific studies was that the worst thing you can do is disrupt the mycelium. That will kill a fungi much more quickly than picking a fruiting body will. And even just kind of scruffling through leaf litter can be enough to damage some of those communication networks. So yeah, certainly highways are not going to do a good job of that.
Okay, and then there's a comment about, do you have any social media links and blogs and things like that? But I guess we can drop them in.
Yeah, I'll give those to Lucy. I've got a load.
Yeah, there's a good Facebook page as well, I think, from the NRN Nature Recovery Network, and there's lots of things on there, photos and things as well from everyone who can contribute to that. That's great. Well, another question. There's loads of questions. Here's one on. Do they need sunlight? They don't have chlorophyll, but yeah, what is their relationship with sunlight?
Some do and some don't. And they don't need it for food, but some just seem to grow better than others. I don't know what differentiates the ones that do and the ones that don't. I'm not sure anyone knows that. But I'm actually growing some to harvest that I bought from a shop at the moment. And one of them needs to have some natural light. Most of them don't like direct sunlight, but some natural light, and the other one needs to be kept in the dark. So I'm not sure why.
Yeah. Well, fabulous. Lovely stuff. So, well, that was good. It's nice, these mini talks. Wouldn't it be great if we could do this in person one day, you know, at the back of a pub or something? It'd be so much nicer, wouldn't it? At some point in the future. So we can all, people that want to stay can chat around and have it, you know, keep going afterwards. But I think these are fabulous. These are really good. So I'm not sure. There's one more left, isn't there? I mean, I don't know if anyone wants to talk about the series or when the next series is going to happen, obviously, because they're so popular that we want another go at this, don't we? Is someone going to take over and talk about the next one?
Kerry had a fantastic idea of having tiny talks for children, which I think would be brilliant. So if anybody has any suggestions of a talk that they might give for a younger generation, that's the next series, I think, isn't it, Kerry? I mean, Renee.
Well, that's what I do. I do kids, you know, I do kids and science. So I certainly thought when I was putting this together, I had some great, well, I think they're great ideas for ways that you could describe and get kids engaged with some of the science, like using strawberry laces and things to illustrate how hyphae and mycelium work. So I'd be very happy to do that. I know a couple of families who are interested in that sort of thing, and there are loads of kids who would love it. So I'm sure that if we had some volunteers, this format of 20 minutes, I think would work really well for children.
I just want to say one more thing. Now we're nearly at the end. But what's really curious, there was a mail out saying, you know, we're thinking of having tiny talks. You know, anybody who's got an enthusiasm or an expertise, we'd love to hear from you. And nobody volunteered. But when I asked, so then I thought, okay, well, there are all sorts of people who know all sorts of stuff in the village, and this is all about a network and everybody coming together. So I emailed everybody I could think of who I knew had interesting things to say, and everybody I asked said yes, great, I'll do it. So it turns out that kind of diffidence is the greatest obstacle to building the network. So we will have another adult series as well. So please do come forward with your enthusiasms, and not, everybody thinks that there's somebody else who knows more, but we all know some things, and everybody, as it turns out, wants to hear about them.
Yeah, quite right. So the last one in this current series is tomorrow evening, when we have Martin, who also lives here in the village, is going to talk to us about the health of our waterways, and in particular what we can learn from invertebrates in the waterways, which I think should be really interesting. So please do join us for that. And yes, as Katrina says, if anybody else has got any ideas and some wisdom that they'd like to share with us, then please do get in touch. Thank you very much.